You were listening to, Idan, Rachel, and Tamir Nachshon singing Shabkar. And my name is Danny Schultz, and on behalf of the Westchester Jewish Council, I am truly honored to be hosting today's event, part of the WJC's very successful monthly Israel Connection series. The WJC, for those of you who don't know, is an umbrella organization representing approximately 135 Jewish groups, schools, and synagogues in Westchester, the largest suburban Jewish community in the United States, totaling 150,000 citizens. Friends, I want to remind all of you, which I probably don't need to do, that we are in unprecedented, frightening times. As you know, we have been hit with an unthinkable tragedy of barbaric acts carried out by Hamas on Shabbat morning, October 7th, 2023, the morning of Simchat Torah. We are now in day 132 of this war and hostage crisis. And so before we dive in, and we have a lot to cover, let that all sink in as we share a moment of silence, both in memory of and in honor of all those lost, captive, and in pain and suffering. Remember, we still have over 130 hostages to bring home. So a moment of silence. Thank you. Today, we are truly honored. I am happy to welcome as our guest, my friend and classmate, David Makovsky. I wish I could hug you through the screen. What a bio. We could take up a whole hour with your bio, but we won't do that. David Makovsky is the Ziegler Distinguished Fellow at the Washington Institute and director of the Koret Project on Arab-Israel relations. David is also an adjunct professor at Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies. In 2013 and 2014, David worked for the U.S. Secretary of State, I believe John Kerry, as a senior advisor for Israeli-Palestinian negotiations under the Obama administration. He is the author of numerous Washington Institute essays on the Middle East peace process and the Arab-Israeli conflict. He is also co-author with Ambassador Dennis Ross of the 2019 book, Be Strong and of Good Courage, How Israel's Most Important Leaders Shaped Its Destiny. The 2009 Washington Post bestseller, Myths, Illusions, and Peace, Finding a New Direction for America in the Middle East. His 2011 maps on the alternative territorial solutions to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict were reprinted by the New York Times in the paper's first interactive treatment of an op-ed. He is a lifetime member of the Council on Foreign Relations and has had his commentary on the peace process and the Arab-Israeli conflict appear in the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Los Angeles Times, the Wall Street Journal, the Financial Times, the International Herald Tribune, and on and on. He has testified before the U.S. Senate Committee on Foreign Relations, the full House of U.S. Representatives Committee on Foreign Affairs, and multiple other committees on foreign affairs and subcommittees. In the last several years, David he's going to have to update this number for us. He has made, I think it's now over 130, probably more visits.
185.
185, so visits to American college campuses to discuss the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. He actually did something before all of that. Before joining the Washington Institute, he was an award-winning journalist covering the peace process from 1989 to 2000, the former executive editor of the Jerusalem Post, diplomatic correspondent for Haaretz, contributing editor for U.S. News and World Report. And in 1994 was, I guess, the first Israeli journalist to write from Syria for an Israeli publication. And he has been in Syria over half a dozen times. Last but not least, he is a Columbia College graduate, class of 83.
Actually, graduated 82 in there.
82, all right, ahead of me. And he went on to earn his master's in Middle Eastern Studies from Harvard University. Last but not least, and certainly not least important, David is a native of St. Louis. I know a proud diehard Cardinals fan Are you a St. Louis Blues fan as well? There must be a hockey something
Yeah,
in.
yeah, yeah.
Okay, it's the
So
St. Louis.
also, I've been a Chiefs fan lately because there's no football team.
There's no football team. Indeed, indeed. David, welcome.
Thank you.
So,
Thank you. It's a delight to be with you, Danny, and I want to salute you for all your good work with the Columbia alumni since October 7th and everything you've done, and not just since October 7th, of course, but it's an honor to have you as a classmate of mine at Columbia. And anyway, but so much to deal with. So let's just dive in here,
yeah,
and
dive right in.
I want to thank Sydney Hilbush, my one of my research assistants who really worked on some a PowerPoint. I find that with COVID, I got into PowerPoint because everyone has got a front row seat now with a screen. So I just find people maps are helpful.
No, it's going to be great. Let me ask you one question to kick
Sure.
things. So we are now in, as I said, day 132 of this horrible tragedy. Where were you on October 7th, and how did you first hear of the attacks?
Yeah, well, I was actually going to my Kemp Mill Synagogue in Silver Spring, Maryland, and people came up to me, said, "Hey, I don't know if you know there's stuff going on," and then it was just piecemeal. And then I was fortunate, mentioning research assistants, that I had invited them to my sukkah as I try to do each year, and and I get Israeli television in Hebrew on my TV, and so someone flipped it on for me because I don't turn on the TV on Shabbat and Chag, and then I told people in my show, and it was like dozens of people just came to my home. I remember the the hakafot at night. I mean, we just none of us had it in us to really dance that evening. But and my wife's father had just died a few weeks ago. We still had the chairs up from Shiva, and then all these people did like a semicircle around the television, and it was like a type of a Shiva watching this all on Israeli TV. But we were glued, and I told my rabbi, and he was like, "Well, I can't tell you officially, but I'm glad you did it." But but I just felt I couldn't be this is I followed this like almost minute by minute in Hebrew for all these decades, and it was just we were all just there's no words how devastating this was. It's been called the worst day of Jewish history since the Holocaust. Um, on the human scale, the trauma, how deep it is. Israel's always saw itself as a fortress, but it learned how permeable that fortress is, and has always thought it's had some vicious enemies right near its borders, and the extent of the barbarism was greater than Israel could have imagined. I think that double trauma of the permeability of the fortress and the viciousness of the enemies has created this enduring trauma that remains. And we're not yet at the PTSD phase right now. So why don't
Yeah,
I just dive in with your
dive
permission?
right in.
Okay, let's go. Sydney, let's roll. All right. So, all right. So I always want to start with a map, just a general thing. I know most people know where Gaza is. I realize it's a very knowledgeable audience, but I find that it doesn't hurt just for people, the few people who might not know exactly where Gaza is, right near the Sinai Desert in Egypt. You see the West Bank just like 40 kilometers away. To orientate yourself, you see Jerusalem right next to the West Bank. You see it right there, right? Tel Aviv, just to orient yourselves, right there. Lebanon in the north, and we'll talk about Lebanon later on if we could see that up there. Sydney, let's see if we have that, and Syria, right next there. Jordan down below. Okay, all right, now let's dive in. All right, so that's a general just sense. So look, there will be a lot of people that are going to talk about the human dimension of this, which is crucial. I feel that I have to, I want to do more like data, more focus on policy, and but obviously the depth of this human tragedy is huge. This is certainly, the longest war Israel has faced since 1948, without a question. All these other wars were much shorter. Even the 1973 Yom Kippur War was, I think, 19 days. We're on day, what did you say, 132? So this is and you know, there a lot of innocent Palestinians have been killed. I know people talking about the Hamas-run Ministry of Health. We could talk about that, but there are numbers here on all sides. There are people displaced, and on all sides. We could talk about that. But let's go to the next slide. You know, putting this October 7th in proportion. 9/11, 2996. And by the way, that's a country of the United States. I mean, if Israel is, you know, doesn't have 330 million people, it has 10 million people now. Thank God, so many. But imagine if it was 33 times that, you know, that would be like, you know, close to what 100,000 Americans. That's what it would mean for Israel. That's what this 1,200 means for Israel. The ISIS attack, but I mean, since 1970, we're talking already 54 years. So this is huge on a world scale, and the brutality, the beheadings, the rapes, the burning of lives, all that is just the barbarism is just horrific. So so that's just a sense of the kind of comparative scope. Let's go to the next one. All right, this is what I really want to just start off with really here. This is like to give you a sense of the state of play.
Sure.
I'm going to talk just for a minute about northern Gaza, southern Gaza, a sense of the three crossing points, eras in the north where I was. I think we even have a photo with Deborah Messing of Hollywood. She and I and about 8 others, Dennis Ross, few others went into this mega tunnel that the day it opened right near the Erez crossing. All the way down in the south, you'll hear Kerem Shalom at the southern corner, and of course Rafah crossing right near the city of Rafah, which we're going to talk about. Those are the crossing points in and out of Gaza. Now, the war that you've been thinking of so much has been for November, December, end of October, I should add, been focused on the north. And that is, you see this squiggly line, Wadi Gaza, the Gaza River. So the focus was to really try to break the back of the Hamas's like organizational apparatus that enabled it to rule. Because the focus here is to drive Hamas from power. You're never going to eliminate every Hamas person. You're never going to be able to take Hamas out of the hearts and minds of people. But you want to just make sure that it can't be in power again to, you know, to do another October 7th and to make Israel's life hell. As I say to many television interviewers, I said, look, in the Obama administration, we went 7,000 miles to Iraq and Syria against ISIS after one journalist was beheaded. This is down the street from Israel. And as the president said, you know, this is worse than ISIS. ISIS did not behead babies and burn people alive who are completely innocent in the same way. And so the focus in the north was really Gaza City. That's where the apparatus of Hamas was really based, and that's where a lot of the battalions of Hamas was based. So that was really the core part of the war. There was 360,000 reservists at the start of this war. There were 5 divisions, let's say each division around 20,000 people, 100,000 combat people. You're now down to 3 divisions. You're down to under 100,000 reservists, below that now. So it's not 360,000, just to give you, and again, I'm sorry if I'm throwing a lot of numbers at you, but I think the most number of reserve days in recent history in Israel was in 82 during the Lebanon War. Israel had 60 days reserve duty. You're now at day 132. So it's a different order of magnitude, and Israel felt it had to let people home and also to restart the economy, to give people a rest if indeed they're going to be needed in Lebanon. So the focus has been on the north. That was November, December, but and I think also in terms of the Palestinian casualties, I think a good number of them came really at the end of October during what became known as phase one, which was the aerial campaign to prepare the ground for the ground incursion, which was, like I said, was focused on November, December. By the time January comes around, Israel really turns its focus to the south and is doing so with fewer soldiers. And maybe you have a lot of relatives and friends, and there might be some who say, yeah, well, my son is doing reserve duty now. Well, I'm not saying there's no reservists, but it's not on the order of magnitude that it was. And Israel's focus has been in Khan Yunis. We'll show you an arrow in the Khan Yunis area in the south there. Khan Yunis is the capital of the south, and frankly, that is where we think Yahya Sinwar has been, the leader of Hamas, in tunnels. There was now some some video that the IDF spokesman put out yesterday, 2 days ago, showing him with his family in Khan Yunis. He's from Khan Yunis. I talked to Mohammed Dahlan just in December, who went to high school in Khan Yunis with Sinwar and with Mohammed Def, and he said then you even knew that they had these Hamas tendencies or Islamist tendencies, I should say. He said the difference between me and the two of you is you guys want to die and I want to live. But he is Israel is there's been sightings is the word. I mean, that video was taken too early on to be of great relevance because it was in October, but we know in January that Israel was in a place in the Khan Yunis tunnels where he left like $5 to $6 million in cash behind. Israel took that as a sign that it was done, that Israel was hot on his trail. So whether that's true, we shall see. But it's clear that the focus in the south is more about being underground. Israel is getting more more focus on how to operate underground. In the beginning, it just sent robots and dogs and things like that because it was worried about booby traps. But now it's clearly has perfected certain things technologically that soldiers are actually in the tunnels. And there's 350 miles though of these tunnels, and it's unclear if all the tunnels connect. Apparently, it's a closed secret of Hamas. Which tunnels connect and which don't, and they don't share that. This isn't like the Manhattan Transit Authority and the New York Transit Authority. There's no maps on the internet. So Israel's operating there. And the question will be, will Israel go from, if they don't catch Sinwar there, will the one last city left is Rafah, as you see below, near the Rafah crossing. There's about 1.3 million Palestinians from the north, most from the north. I shouldn't say all are from the north, but many are from the north. And there's this horrific lie about Israel and genocide is if Israel wanted to perpetrate genocide, would it tell 1.1 million Gazans in the north here, stay out of harm's way and go southward to be near the humanitarian trucks? So, I mean, it's a contradiction in terms, these things. And also, I think part of the civilian casualties, and again, your heart has to go out also to any civilians that are hurt in this conflict on either side. I do want to be clear about one thing. There's different rules when it comes to Israel than it is to any other country on earth. If there is fighting in Mosul, in Raqqa, in Fallujah, in Iraq, the first thing you do is you take the civilians and you move them away. You move them to Turkey, you move them to Jordan, you move them to Lebanon. So they're out of harm's way. Here, there's a policy decision not to move them out of Gaza because Egypt is convinced to its bones that Israel wants to dump the Palestinian issue on Egypt's lap. And Egypt and Jordan really kind of insisted the U.S. make this a policy point that no Gazans are allowed to leave Gaza. Yes, if you have an American passport, you could go, but not if you're a Palestinian. So clearly, if the innocents are kept in a narrow area, there's going to be a higher number of fatalities. Again, that doesn't mean your heart doesn't go out to these people and the like, but let's be clear that this is not the same kind of warfare that we see elsewhere. Also, I would urge you to read John Spencer. I would of West Point, who's the head of the urban warfare, who said, look, this is a problem from hell that we in the U.S. never had to deal with. We never had to deal with all these tunnels in urban warfare. Yes, you can go back to Vietnam, but the density here is, we fought one city. This is not one city. This is all of the Gaza Strip. This is city by city by city, and all the tunnels, and the public has nowhere else to go. And so that adds layers of complexity that is not always appreciated in the media. And I try to make those points out of fairness. So now the question is, does Israel go into Rafah? I'm not sure it will. I think Netanyahu wanted to make the statement because he was fearful that a lot of the Hamas people would leave Khan Yunis believing that Rafah is like a city of asylum, a sanctuary city. You would say in Hebrew, an ir miklat, that is a free zone, that if you get to Rafah, no, you can't be touched. So Israel wants to say it's not so. To be fair to the Biden administration, they didn't say don't attack Rafah. They said just don't do it if you don't have a plan where to move the people. Look at this Muasi area, which used to be Gush Katif, in the right off the coast where Sydney has got the pointer. And that's where a lot of the tent cities are. And it will be interesting to know if that extends that area, if Israel feels that it has to. The Egyptians are freaked out that any attack in Rafah, almost by definition, will lead to people being forced over the border, whether it's policy or not. And they are building up big, higher and higher fences to block that. I was just talking to an Egyptian security official yesterday, and it's clear that Egypt is threatening that if this isn't handled carefully, this will hurt the peace treaty, which has bound Israel, the most populated Arab state since the Sadat years of the late 70s. So, and there were all these tunnels, 1,500 tunnels that Egypt sealed up, but it's possible that a lot of the smuggling happened before the sealing up of the tunnels, but there's still 4 tunnels there. No one's saying that it's coming from Sisi himself to smuggle things in. He hates the Muslim Brotherhood. And I think that's really one of the reasons why he doesn't want more Gazans, because he feels they are ideological. But I said to them, I said, look, you don't know what the bakshish, the bribes of a low level Egyptian corporal or private or things like that. Maybe a lot of things have gotten in. So how they deal with this area, it's called, I know you're going to think, why is this name Philadelphia, like as in Philadelphia? That is the corridor along that southern line, and how Israel is going to deal exactly where Sydney's got the arrow. That is a huge thing for Israel to make sure that things cannot come in. And so this requires Egyptian, Israeli, American consultations. I saw a quote of Herzi Halevi, the chief of staff of the IDF, saying, when asked about Rafah, or known in Hebrew as Rafiah, he said, look, we got to consult with the Egyptians. So you don't want to blow up the peace treaty over this. At the same time, there's got to be a solution to ensure no more smuggling. Now, looming on top of all this is the fact that Ramadan is coming up on March 10th. Now, Ramadan is, something that, that's going to impact calculations. Some people say, well, you want keep Ramadan quiet, everyone's quiet, but Ramadan has been at times, as you remember, during the Temple Mount issues, the Al-Aqsa, the Haram al-Sharif as known by Muslims, that's been a time where there's been an upsurge of attacks. Yeah, and after all, don't forget, Ramadan was the war of 73 is called the Ramadan War. So it's not like there can't be fighting in Ramadan, and Jews will say, wait a second, didn't they do October 7th on Simchat Torah in Israel? Shmini Atzeret it was called in the United States. So it's unclear, but it's clear that this has got U.S. officials very nervous that the worst is still ahead, if not handled, not diffused in some way. US would like a hostage deal sooner rather than later. So let me just go through a few of the other slides here. We can go back, Sydney, to where we were. And I'll try to. So look, the hostage negotiations, I think for the U.S. is clearly the off ramp from this highway. It doesn't mean Israel can't go back at a certain point to finish things in Rafah, but it clearly what the U.S. wants to do, and I'm going to talk about that in a moment, is pivot off this war to a grand breakthrough with Saudi Arabia. That is like, being as Danny knows, I love sports. This is like the Super Bowl, the World Cup, or both of them combined, the World Series, all wrapped together. If indeed there is a deal with Israel and Saudi Arabia, the U.S. wants to pivot to this real soon because it feels there's not a lot of time in an election year, and it feels it must pivot. It can't tell Israel to end this war. That's not up to the United States. But if you could get these hostages out, start with 35 to 40 of them, women, men over 60, those with medical conditions, in return for some prisoners, great as phase one. And then the remainder of the 134, although many of them are dead, at least 28 officially, but I think unofficially, the number is far higher. And the Palestinians want a commitment on an end to this war, which Israel says it can't give. Basically, it's not just ending the war, but it means IDF out. It means they're back in control. And that's a non-starter for Israel. So I think it's, where the talks are stuck right now. There was a round in Cairo this week with Bill Burns of the CIA, Dadi Barnea of the Mossad, Abbas Kamel. He's the host of the Egyptian intelligence, and the Prime Minister of Qatar. I think the U.S. would say, well, look, maybe there's some progress, that there's a delinking of the phase one, getting 35 to 40 out at the start of the pause, to phase two, where the Hamas is still linking it. But right now, so far, Israel says that's not enough of an easing. And so right now, those talks are fairly stuck at this moment. Let's go to the next slide here. And here's just public attitudes in Israel. We're clearly seeing a softening in Israel, wanting to get, where do you put the primacy between bringing the hostage homes or toppling Hamas? But often the question is, how is the questions asked? And if you say, is it getting the hostages out or ending the war and pulling out of Gaza and having Hamas back in power, you might get different numbers. But we're seeing people feel, it's a sense of rahmanut, a sense of mercy that, oh my God, these hostages, how long can they hold out? You've got to bring them home. We're seeing differences based on your views are more left, center, right. We're seeing differences in the percentages as well. I'm just going quickly because I know we want to get to the conversation. There's the whole question of the second front with Lebanon. I think that it's not just border skirmishes now. But it's gone beyond that. It's just that right now, Israel, Lebanon, more importantly, Hezbollah and Iran, each for their own reasons, do not want all-out war. For Iran, that is very nefarious and is using proxies because they don't accept Israel the size of a telephone booth on a Tel Aviv beach. Let's be honest. And they're using Houthis and they're using Hezbollah in Iraq. But when it comes to Hezbollah in Lebanon, this is a separate Hezbollah than the Iraqi Hezbollah. The main Hezbollah, for that, Iran is saying, wait, we gave you all this weapons because we want you as an insurance policy that if Israel hits the Iranian nuclear program, you hit Israel's second strike. So that is a deterrent, and we don't want Hezbollah chewed up by the Israelis for Hamas. We paid for this, all these weapons, and we did it for a purpose. We did it for ourselves to keep the nuclear program. Anyway, so that is, but the problem is it's the Middle East, and the Middle East there's brinkmanship, and you don't always know exactly where the brink is, so there's always a chance of miscalculation. But right now, the fighting is pretty much in the south, although Israel's hitting Nabatea, north of the Litani River. But for the most part, the fighting is within that zone. I've got a lot to say about the Litani, but you can imagine, I'll just say this in one sentence. You can imagine that for if you lived in the north and you have probably friends and relatives there, that like, if you didn't like the book, you don't want to see the movie. It's like, the whole point is, you feared what happened October 7th, because of what Hamas did. Will Radwan, the commando force of Hezbollah, will they do the same to the north? Will they, God forbid, rape people, behead them? And so, success for Israel is convincing the 80,000 Israelis who live in the north, in Kiryat Shimon, in Metula, in these places, to feel safe to go back to their homes. They don't want to go back to their homes with their children if they feel Radwan the Hezbollah commandos can go right up to the border. Now, of course, under 2006 war, the terms of the UN Security Council resolution, they are not supposed to go below the Litani. However, unfortunately, Hezbollah did. I mean, there was a Lebanese armed forces, but and there was UNIFIL, but they are, I'm sorry to say, but they've been rather toothless. And as soon as Hezbollah went to the southern, to the northern border of Israel, to their southern border, the Lebanese army went away. They're not a normal army, the Lebanese army. They're more like a glorified police force. And so this raises the question, what deal could you make that would, enforce, any Security Council resolution, or else it's just meaningless. It doesn't mean anything. So anyway, we could talk some more about it in the Q&A. All right, finally, let's go over to the regional thing. This is the big picture. This is the big story. The United States wants this deal with Saudi Arabia and Israel. And it's very important that you guys understand this, because what you need to know is that for the United States, the idea of a defense treaty, look, from the Saudis, they're the ones who initiated this. Their view is we have no NATO in the Middle East. If Putin hits Germany, the U.S. goes to war for Germany. But when the Iranians hit the Saudi Aramco oil facility in 2019, under Trump administration, the U.S. didn't respond. So their view is you don't really care about us. You'll give us all these niceties, but you won't come to our defense. So I think for them, the key is finding a way that they want to know that the U.S. would go to war for Saudi Arabia. And they want a defense treaty. They don't want it to be up to the whim of this president, that president. They see the American system every 4 years changes around, and their kings can last for 50 years. They want to know that they have a treaty that is like what the U.S. has with Japan in 1960 or Korea in the 1950s. Why is this important for Israel? It's crucial because to get a treaty, you need 2/3 of the Senate. And that's what this is all about. And the Saudis have come around to the view that without a peace with Israel, they don't get 2/3 of the Senate. There's not enough senators because there might be 52 Democrats, 48 Republicans, or 52 Republicans, 48 Democrats, but 52 is not 67. So peace with Israel is a byproduct to what they want. And it's a new generation, a young leader who doesn't have the same worldview of his father, who grew up much more in an Arab narrative that is all about Israel. And they see Israel's a stabilizer. Israel's against Al-Qaeda, they're against Al-Qaeda. Israel's against ISIS, they're against ISIS. Israel's against, the Brotherhood, they're against the Brotherhood. So for them, and more importantly, they see oil as something that's going to be phased out over time. And they feel the need to digitize and diversify their economy. And they believe that Israel is going to remain in the Middle East. They don't know about the United States. They think the U.S. is going to pivot to Asia and might leave the Middle East, but they feel that the one country that can't afford to leave the Middle East is the one that lives there, and that's the Israelis. So they see Israel, I think, as part of the solution, not part of the problem. So they want this grand, what I call mega deal. But for the administration, and this is crucial to understand, this is my last point, what's crucial to understand is that the administration feels it doesn't have a lot of time, that this has a great strategic benefit. It limits China, and there's going to be some sort of side agreements on what sort of technology Saudi Arabia can pass to China. There's going to be dimensions of a civil nuclear program, which we could discuss. But this is a strategic gain for the U.S. that is seeking to marginalize China in the Middle East. And it's also a historic gain. That's what I said about the Super Bowl and the World Cup and the World Series, about this is the granddaddy of all Arab countries. This is the ultimate Arab state, Saudi Arabia, the most powerful, the most influential, the wealthiest. And if they do this deal, wow, this is the Abraham Accords on steroids. And clearly you can say, yeah, and it doesn't hurt this president who's in an election year to have such a diplomatic triumph. They want to do this in the spring. They are worried that they won't get Republican votes later on. And it's interesting that even Lindsey Graham, a staunch Republican, friends of this prime minister, has come around to the view, as the prime minister's office has encouraged Lindsey Graham to say, hey, if we do this, we're better off doing this under Biden, because he'll bring Democrats who wouldn't join under Republicans, because the Democrats have had traditionally a more complicated relations with the Saudis. So Graham has been telling MBS, do this deal with Biden. That's your best chance to get 67. Otherwise, if it's a Republican, we might only have 51 in 2025, assuming the Republicans win, which we don't know that either. So this is where things are. And that has led us to the U.S. now considering, which is going to be controversial, not just in the American Jewish community, but and certainly in parts of Israel. The Saudis are saying, listen, we need some political cover. We cannot look like traitors. Someone who's close to MBS told me that, quoting MBS, we have to have something on the Palestinian issue, that we got something that no other Arab got. We got some move towards a Palestinian state. Doesn't mean we get the state, but a pathway towards it. And that is bound to create some friction points between the U.S. and Israel. But right now, this is, for the Saudis, they're saying all of our television sets since October 7th is all about the Arab kids that are killed. You say, what about the Jewish kids? Yes, that's probably there. Maybe it's not on Al Jazeera, but clearly they feel some responsibility in that regard. I have a whole op-ed coming out on this point of how would you actually enforce something demilitarized, because that has not been the experience of Israel until now when it comes to the Palestinians. But let's just wait on that. I'm sorry I threw so much at you, but we don't have so much time. I want to be sure Danny has time to ask his questions. I'm willing to stay until after the 1 o'clock hour, or some of you do, to answer more. And I apologize if I threw too much at you, but I just wanted to give you a little bit of like a tip of the iceberg flavor. This is just the tip of the iceberg, but I wanted at least to give you something.
All right, we're gonna dive in here, David. That was fantastic. I appreciate it. We all appreciate it. We do have questions. You and I are gonna have a conversation for a little while, and then we're gonna start hitting the questions in chat. So as everybody who's been on this before hopefully knows, all the questions need to be populated in chat. We don't do any live questions, and we'll do our best to go through them and make sure that they are asked, if not answered already. So for you and I, David, just very quickly, I mean, you were in the tunnels in Gaza very recently with the other DM, the other one, David.
We have a picture of it. I think Sydney put it in. Sydney, you could show the picture. I didn't even know her. I was so embarrassed. I said, I need this picture for my wife and for my daughter.
Don't even say
that. My daughter doesn't know who Will and Grace is. Where's the one with what's her name? I think she's there. I don't know. Maybe not. I don't know. Maybe she does. Isn't there. But I thought I saw it. But yeah, but she
was on the invitation. You used it for the invitation.
Yeah.
So what'd you see there? What are your were there 3 or 4 quick takeaways?
Quick takeaways. I would say, look, this was like their mega tunnel. You come out of the tunnel and you can look on like a next hilltop or 2 hilltops, and you see 2 or 3 yeshuvim, kind of villages, kibbutzim, that are only like a kilometer away. It looks like to me. I didn't have a Waze there, so I couldn't measure it exactly, but but it was wide enough that a car could go. So it was almost like, someone said these guys could build tunnels, in other cities when they're down here, because you could fit a car through this tunnel. And what's also, when you look at the wiring and the tubing and all this, you could envision that this was something that was put forward as what we call dual use. You know, it was something. Oh, there's Deborah Messing down in the bottom corner. That's her. There she is. So, and Dennis Ross is the other one of the other.
Yeah.
But what you so you see, like it's wide here. I don't know if you can see it, but a lot of dual use stuff got in to build these tunnels. And this was like almost right under Israel's nose. It was 150 yards away from the Erez crossing point. Did Israel not know about it, or Israel knew about it and was convinced, that they couldn't use it, or they could cut it off at a certain point, or they were afraid to start a war over it? That part, I think, will have to come out in the commission that was bound to emerge about October 7th.
Right.
But it is, we could let's put it this way, 4 people across in that tunnel that you're seeing here.
Amazing. All right, let's go to Hamas for a second. I think it'd be very helpful if you could maybe explain the different roles and hierarchy among Sinwar, Hania,
Yeah,
and Mashal,
right.
and who
And
calls the shots and how does that work?
great question. Look, I think Sinwar is an example of where you did a prisoner exchange. Israel traded, I'm sure you remember this, Danny, and I hope others do too. And a guy named Gilad Shalit, this was like someone who everyone thought could be my son. He's a young corporal, and they traded 1,037 people for one guy. One of the guys they traded him for was Yahya Sinwar. And he goes on to be the mastermind of Hamas and tells other like kind of heavy prisoners, as they call them, that mean the prisoners that have committed, perpetrated, huge amounts of terror, I'm going to get you out too. And so he feels a certain commitment to these prisoners. So they're not just going for the low end prisoners. They want to get out the worst terrorists. But he's the guy who's clearly in charge. There's a guy, Mohammed Def. We don't hear about him as much as he did. We think he's in wheelchairs. He can't be mobile in the tunnels in Khan Yunis the way Sinwar is. From what we hear, and I talked to actually a Qatari person who I had a kind of contentious relationship with lately, and he said we don't think Def is with him in the tunnels. It's just you would have to maneuver, and apparently even the hostages that he's surrounded by hostages. Apparently, he's surrounded by a lot of the what we call prime age male tunnels hostages because he wants people who are mobile, who can really move around quickly, so he can be agile. He doesn't want the oldest people or the youngest people with him. So Sinwar is number one. I don't think Def is with him, but the two others that you point out correctly are important are Ismail Hania, who is now based in Doha, and Khalid Mashal, who is someone who's a favorite of the Qataris. And you say, what does Qatar have to do with all this? Where did this come from? And it's a speck of a country, and we talk to Qatari officials, they're very blunt about it. They're a very wealthy country that's a speck in the Gulf on the Gulf, but they have a lot of natural gas. And they are like the Vanguard 500 fund of Arab states. They want to diversify risk. So they want to have the El Udeid Air Force Base of the United States, where they put no restrictions on American aircraft. They built the whole Air Force Base for the United States. And they want to have Al Jazeera, which is spewing anti-American hatred all day. And they want to have both. And I had a whole like back and forth with this Qatari guy who came, and I said, you make it sound like a pass-fail course, that like you're doing the minimum. You feel your value added is to be America's like link to the bad guys, because America can't speak to them, but in this messy world, someone has to talk to the bad guys.
Right.
And you say it's Condoleezza Rice in 2006 who asked you to take in the Hamas political leaders, meaning now would be Hania and Mashal. Used to just be Mashal, I believe. I said, by that token, if they asked you to kick them out, would you do that too? He said, look, we're not married to these people. Now, the U.S. has found there's a value in having these guys there during the hostage negotiations. But clearly, if they don't produce, I think the next step is the U.S. is going to ask them to leave. There's no value in keeping these people there. And Dadi Barnea, the head of the Mossad, said, like, anyone even indirectly connected with October 7th, we're coming after you. Right. And so I don't think that I would not buy an insurance policy if I was,
gotcha.
I
saw something yesterday. I saw also that the PA made some statements. I thought the Palestinian Authority made some statements about and I may get this wrong, but maybe you can explain it, that Hamas was endangering Palestinians or something to that effect.
Yeah, that was interesting.
Yeah,
That's a
yeah.
rare
I
thing.
thought that was very interesting. Can you touch on that for a
Well,
second?
that's a great question. I mean, it's look, they have a terrible relationship, all right? And it's either Abbas or Hamas. I mean, for them, 2007 was that point, and that literally Hamas threw PA people off of rooftops of hospitals,
Yep, yep.
Gaza, and they took over. I when I go on the PBS NewsHour from time to time on TV, and I said, listen, like this is Israel's nightmare, is that you make a deal with one set of people and then another set of people outmuscle, outmaneuver, and they take over. And this is why it's not enough to say you want a demilitarized state, but it has to be enforced to avoid what happened in 2007. 2007 was not a one-time episode. If it was, I'd say, oh, well, that's history. But it's not. It's that moment on till 2024, right now. Hamas took over Gaza. So I think they have a terrible relationship, and but they don't want to be seen as kind of pro-Israeli, especially as their own people are dying.
Mhm.
Other Palestinians are dying, not Fatah people, but other Palestinians. So it's complicated for them, but what you need is someone to take over there who is going to make it a more normal place, and
Right.
not and Hamas cannot take control again. It just Israel
So
cannot
let's
permit
so
that.
let's so let's dive into that. I'm going to jump over some
Sure,
questions here, and
sure.
you and I have had this conversation a little bit um, before. So who is there then when you say that on the other side to talk to? Who
Right,
would you, in your opinion, kind of like to see, or maybe
right,
wouldn't be surprised to see
right. Look, there's very few, but
right.
there's very few. It's a very short list. But I do think, and here is a little glimmer of hope, if people are looking for a little glimmer, is the Gulf of Arabs understand like this cannot go on like this. This can't go on every few years. I mean, there's been 4 rounds of fighting until this fifth round, 2008, at the end of that, and early 2009, 2012, 2014. I was in the US government, 51 days of fighting. And then 2021 doesn't include different rounds that Israel's had with the Islamic Jihad, by the way.
Mm.
So this can't go on. And I think the Gulf is saying, find me somebody who's not corrupt, who we can invest in, who will actually want to build and not destroy. And I think the name that is clear that comes up the most, and they know them well, is Salam Fayyad. He's at Princeton now. He has a PhD from the University of Texas, and he was prime minister from 2007 to 2013. He put their budget on the internet. He was very transparent. He built roads. He built schools. He built clinics. He built hospitals. He built sewage. He did all the things that somebody who wanted to actually care for Palestinians would do. And he did it. And he's willing to put his life on the line again to go back. And the Gulf is willing to fund it. But they want to be sure he's empowered. And the fear is, frankly, Abbas is 88 years old. You can't make this stuff up. By that comparison, maybe Joe Biden's a spring chicken, and it says, listen, we're willing to put money in, but we're not going to put money in to somebody's pocket in a Swiss bank account. So we need to know this guy has authority to build for reconstruction. Any Israeli you talk to, and I was there, I met, the whole war cabinet. I did not see Bibi, but I saw his top two advisors, a guy named Ron Dermer, another guy named Sachi Anegbi. Um, and then I talked to former National Security Advisor Bibi, even people on the right said, you get Salam Fayyad, you've got somebody serious. He's a partner because he actually wants to do something, build,
Mm.
and not tear down Jews. So, will he be will they allow this to happen? It's touchy for the United States and the Arabs because no one wants to tell the Palestinian, this is your leader.
Mm.
But I think left to his own devices, I'm sorry to say this, but I think Abbas will probably name somebody who's corrupt, and then the Gulf will say, well, listen, if he's corrupt, I'm sorry. I mean, it's not
Mm.
like these people are Jeffersonians. I want to be clear in the Gulf. They're not Jeffersonians, but it's their money, and they don't want the money to go to someone else's pocket. They don't mind it going to their pocket, but not someone else's pocket. So they go, give me someone who's a doer, who's a builder. I'll tell you one very, very brief story that will make some people smile and give you maybe some hope, maybe a little bit. So I would always see Fayyad when I go to Ramallah when he was prime minister. And he said, David, I'm the only guy in all of the West Bank on the Palestinian side who, before I go to sleep, I read Zionist history. And I thought the Zionists, they're geniuses. It's funny because the Jews always think that the Arabs are outsmarting them. But here's a Palestinian prime minister when he's prime minister. And he said, what did they? He said they did between the Balfour Declaration of 1917 and the partition plan 1947, 30 years, they built fantastic institutions. They
Ah,
didn't know the state would be built. They didn't know, but they built universities. They built sick funds, Kupat Cholim. They built the Histadrut, the trade union. They built, banks. They built all the institutions that you need for a modern functioning society. He said by the time the Jews had declared the state, they had already built the state. It was a generation, it was the faith of a generation from 1917, 1947 that had faith in the institution building that this state has fantastic building. He said, Arafat just told us, declare the state and then we'll figure it out. No, that's not the way to go. The way to go is to build institutions. And so I don't think it's a surprise that Israel sees in Salam Fayyad someone who has got a proven track record of building, who believes that if the Palestinians are to have any chance in this world, they have to work with Israel, not against Israel. Now, there's often a fine line. There's going to be points of disagreement. I'm not saying, but it's a very short bench, I'm sorry to say, of people who have that track record. He
right,
does.
right.
And the Gulf is willing to back him. But
That's
they
very
got to
important.
know that Abbas is willing to give them authority. And right now, he's not willing to do it.
So let me turn for a second to sort of post-Gaza rebuilding, and I want to touch on education, the educational system. So, there was an article recently, I haven't even had a chance to read it yet, about, how does the West Bank look more like Japan, what is it called, Bushido,
Yeah.
uh, World War II, or, post Germany, post World War II. And I want to just start really with the education system.
Yes, absolutely.
How can the education system be overhauled? And I will say, anecdotally, I heard one of Israel's foreign ministers in London say, I'm forgetting his name, you may know him, that through the Abraham Accords, that there has been progress made in teaching to a number of the countries that are members to the Arab Accords that Jews are not infidels,
Yeah.
that there is sort of a different attitude now that Jews are not infidels, and it is not a fight about who does the land belong to. He said there's a concept that's growing of we all belong to the land. So rather than arguing over who the land belongs to,
Yeah,
it's
that's
we
Paul
all
Becker. He's a
Hmm?
good Paul Becker.
Yes.
He's the legal advisor for me. He's a close friend of mine. He's a brilliant guy, and he's a
So
treasure of the state of Israel.
so do you hear people on the Arab side, on the Palestinian side, talking about changing the education
Right,
system? How can UNRWA be overhauled?
right.
And
Now,
there's a
these are
lot.
great questions. Look, I think, and again, I don't want to, I have to be careful extrapolating too much.
Okay.
But look, the Emirates, they now have Holocaust education in their curriculum for junior high schools.
Hmm.
This was unheard of. They used to talk about, Anne Frank as a forgery, those diaries. I mean,
Hmm.
the whole Arab world, I think there's a chance here. And I don't want to overstate, and you could say the Emirates is, they're the best case scenario, but they also have revised credentialing imams on how, if you want to be a preacher in a mosque, what can you say? What can you not say? They see that radicalism will bring them down way before it'll bring down Jews and in the state of Israel. So they have really shifted their curriculum in Arabic. And the question is can you do more of this? You have a case of the Saudis. They have a de-radicalization curriculum for people who come back from ISIS or Taliban, Afghanistan, all these crazy places. And their view is, we have to de-radicalize. Now, you're talking about changing a whole political culture. It's not going to happen overnight. It's going to take time. And I know this is something the Prime Minister's office is very focused on about how do you change the culture, but it's hard to do that if people feel, yeah, but while they're going to take 30 years to change the culture, you're going to next during those 30 years. So there's there's a question here. I think the way to frame it, maybe, Danny, maybe, is to talk about these places of schools of excellence, is
Hmm.
to try to get Gulf funding for science, for math, for things that are not rote learning. Don't let it, the Gulf is not going to want to be seen as doing Israel's bidding. You know, the Palestinians will say, it's easy for you in the Gulf. You never fought the Israelis. We've had a hot conflict. Now, the curriculums, I think, changed in Europe, but it was only after the war was over. You
Right.
know, you have to believe the war is over. You know, if you look at the French and the Germans, they fought each other for hundreds of years. Um, they have to believe the war's over. But I think you need the Gulf, Europeans, America, of course, to think about schools of excellence that could at least make a dent into this. You don't change a political culture overnight. I have to believe after this crisis is over, as you said, Danny, correctly, that that the whole UNIFIL, I mean, the whole UNRWA, the
Mhm.
UN Relief and Works Agency, it has to be, I don't know, either seriously overhauled or scrapped or greatly diminished. After 12 of its members were, including teachers, were involved in the killings of October 7th, they now found a server farm underneath, the headquarters of UNRWA, where they use the same electricity for a Hamas computers, a whole server farm. Now, UNRWA will say, we didn't know, but come on. I mean, this was right underneath your headquarters.
Right.
So there has to be a serious overhaul. And this is a multi-billion-dollar thing. It's going to take years, but if it's seen as a pretext that Israel could annex while they take their time to change their political culture, it'll be seen as an excuse. So you have to handle this carefully. It's like, oh yeah, they want us to take 30 years, to go through this period. Yeah, but Israel then annexes right away. So then they're just playing for time.
Well,
So
then the pressure's
it
on
needs to
them.
be, this has to be done very carefully. But I'm glad you asked that.
But the pressure is on them then to overhaul the education system.
Right,
So
absolutely.
let's turn to the north for a second. So when I was in Israel mid-December, Benny Gantz and others who we met with, it
Right.
was very clear that Hezbollah's got to be moved back behind the Litani River. And for those who don't know, the Litani is what, David, 40, 50 kilometers
Oh
away from.
yeah, we have 15 miles or so. We can put the slide back up if you'd like, Sydney, of the Litani and Lebanon, just so add some. By the way, we have slides about Israeli domestic politics too. I just don't know what your time is. I can go a little bit longer.
Yeah, we'll go another 15 minutes. I think if
Okay, that's
people
fine.
want to stay, great. If not,
All right.
so be it. But honestly, I think you and I could go for hours.
Yeah,
But
good, easy.
how do you move? This was my how do you move? I mean, I remember Sarit Zahavi of the Alma Institute, who you probably know, and she's spoken to us before, showing us slides of the border now
Yeah,
between Lebanon and Israel with Hezbollah fighters
yeah,
with binoculars
yeah,
right at the border,
yeah,
staring
yeah,
over.
absolutely.
So how do you move Hezbollah beyond the Litani River?
Right.
Uh, does Israel have to finish in Gaza? And what is the mechanism to do that, if not preemptively?
Yeah. Um,
I don't
Look,
know.
this is a huge question. It's a huge question. I mean, Israel clearly needs a breather after this war to restock, to give reservists time at minimum. I just talked to a former Israeli general this morning who said we can't do this like on a dime. Yeah, no, if we have to. It might require, would the United States provide the aircraft cover support so Hezbollah can't overwhelm Iron Dome? Because there's
Mm,
only a certain number of Iron Dome batteries in the north. Um, Lebanon is now, since the 2006 war, they've got somewhere between 150,000 and 200,000 rockets. Some of them are what we call PGM, precision guided munitions that could hit anywhere in Israel within 15 feet. And that is something that Israel has not struck at, and they haven't used any PGM against Israel.
mhm.
But it raises a key question. What the Biden administration is trying to do is to say, let's see if there's a way out of this. You don't want a war, you in Lebanon, and Hezbollah doesn't want it. They insist, and Israel doesn't want it. So is there a solution where you deploy LAF back to the border and move out Hezbollah? Now, do you move them all the way to Litani? That's what should be. That's what's UN Security Council Resolution 1701.
Right.
But the question is, will that happen? And you know, in 2006 they deployed in the beginning too, and then they ran away because Hezbollah intimidated them, outmuscled them. I keep saying that's the same theme. If you're looking for a thread from Gaza 2007 and Lebanon 2006. I mean, again, I don't like to live in the past, but those are the years that changed the whole trajectory, you
Hmm.
know, and you never recovered from that.
Right.
And so the problem in the Middle East, if someone said, David, summarize it for me in a sentence, that part of the problem is in the Middle East that the non-state actors are stronger than state actors. Hezbollah and Hamas
Hmm.
outmuscle, outmaneuver states. And no one's willing to take them on. And until someone's willing to enforce, we're all just talking to ourselves and wishful thinking, I fear.
Yeah.
So I think we
And
have to
some
be
of
aware
the,
of the problem. And I was at a conference in the UAE,
hmm.
and people said, well, why should Hamas not be allowed to run or Hezbollah not be allowed to run? Israel's got people that doesn't recognize Oslo either. And I said, it's very simple. To me, the clear, bright line is it's very simple. Are you either about ballots or about bullets? You can't be both a party and a militia at the same time. If in our country, the United States of America, the
Right.
Democrats had their militia and the Republicans had their militia, uh, you know, we wouldn't be a democracy. But in the Middle East, the people who fire the shots call the shots because they don't just run as a party, they have a private army. It makes all the difference. In Israel, there's nothing equivalent to it. I know you guys say, but aren't there some extremist settlers? Yes, there are. But that's not an army with missiles and 150,000 rockets or anything like that. There's a few, you know, there's loose individuals, and I condemn any acts of violence, but you can't compare. My God, no. So anyway, this is to me, this has to be addressed. And now, and therefore, if you say, Danny, you ask me and say, David, so you're telling me the Biden administration, they want a diplomatic solution. So Hamas, the Radwan commandos are not on the border, but will the LAF actually stand there? Will they stand their ground?
No.
Or will we see an outmuscling that we saw in 2006? If it's just a repeat of 2006, thank you very much. It's not going to work. And so that's the situation uh, uh,
Well,
where
and
what the U.S. is trying to do, and it's unclear to me if it's going to lead to a more stable reality or not. The test is one simple thing. Can
yeah.
you convince people to take their families back to Kiryat Shmona? If you can't do that, you haven't succeeded.
Yeah, well, it sounds like all roads lead to neutering Iran, which some of the questions
Yeah,
have gotten to.
right.
I want to hit on Israeli politics for a minute here. So, does Netanyahu have a shot of winning, and who are the next set of leaders? You've got Gantz,
Right.
Eisenkot, Bennett. Who are other front runners?
Right. Here, let's go to that. We got that slide just real quick, although I could talk about this for hours and hours.
We're having you back next Thursday.
All right. So basically, this is the just a dashboard of kind of 71% of the Israeli public wants early elections, 57% dissatisfied with Bibi, 43% say Gantz is more suited than Bibi. I think Bibi 30% say he's more suited than Gantz, and 93% support a state commission of inquiry on what happened on October 7th, that there was this systemic collapse.
Right.
So in the polling data, we try to keep these up to date. So this goes up to February 12th. Again, I want to thank Sydney for all her work. This is channel 12, which is the biggest channel. I usually look also very closely at channel 13, but the numbers are similar on the left. Gantz is at 37. Likud is at under BB under 8 is at 18. right
Hmm.
now. Now, if you look at it in terms of, I don't know if we have that here. I should have put this in. If you look at it in terms of who was in the anti-Bibi coalition, it's basically 70-71, I think. And I think Bibi is, and the, Likud, Haredim, ultra-Orthodox settlers are at about 44, 46. I've seen as high as 48. Now you could say, yeah, okay, that's now, David, but things will tighten up in an election. Bibi will run against Biden on this whole Palestinian state thing. Okay, it's not a state, it's a move towards a state, but he will pitch it in a certain way. He wants the Saudi deal, but he doesn't want the Palestinian string connected to the Saudi deal. So maybe his numbers will pop up more. I think part of the issue is the unity party where you see the 37. And by the way, when they say if Gadi Eisenkot was and I should disclose, Gadi Eisenkot is a close friend of mine and was a visitor at the Washington Institute. We had like a chavruta for an hour, for 6 months, an hour a day for 6 months. His office was two doors down from me.
Hmm.
And what was in this hallway where I'm sitting, there's no doubt, and I was at the Shiva, and for his son.
Those of you who don't know, Gadi Eisenkot,
He was a former chief of staff, and he's a person to me of real like strategic thinking, and he's very unassuming.
and
Uh,
his son was
was
killed.
killed in the war, and I had dinner with him and his son a few years ago. My whole family, Gadi's whole family, and his son went to be a camp counselor in New York at a reform summer camp. He said, I wanted to get to know American Jews, and that was why he did it. And then when I posted something about it, his supervisor at the camp said, Gal was fantastic with kids. He just had so much energy. Kids loved him. Anyway, it's a loss. And anyway, so he pulls at 39. If he's at the head of the ticket, Gotti's 30, Benny's 37. I do think, to be fair, however, that there's a lot of those 37, 39 that are actually right of center voters, and they just are mad at Bibi over October 7th. They think you're Mr. Security. How did you let this happen? It's your fault. And they are kind of parked with Benny and Gotti right now. When you ask them if Bennett would run, and you mentioned Naftali Bennett, and he and I
Right.
are also very much in touch, and on WhatsApp and all the time. I've been to his home many times. If you ask, if Bennett would run, then the Benny Gotti number drops from 37 to 23.
Uh-huh.
Similarly, the other
Uh-huh.
name that drops that takes right of center voters is Yossi Cohen of the Mossad. He of the former head of the Mossad during a lot of those high profile things like getting the Iranian nuclear archives, if you remember that whole thing. So when those two guys, when you ask about it, if Naftali runs or if Yossi Cohen runs, then the 37 number drops to 23. That tells me a lot of people are parked with Benny or Gotti, but they haven't closed the deal with them. So it's somewhat fluid, and I think Bibi's counting on the fact that that if there is an election, he will run against the United States, ironically, not against America, saying it's a great friend, but its Palestinian ideas are dangerous,
Hmm.
and try to bring out his numbers up. So we'll see. I mean, and it gets to a question again. I don't want to bore your people, but if you look at the Camille Fuchs poll on Sunday, they asked them, should Benny and Gotti leave the government? Their voters don't want them to leave because they're afraid. We haven't talked much about Smotrich and Ben Gvir, part of the hard right, but they're afraid that they will hold the balance of power. And they'll say, look, you haven't gotten Sinwar yet, and you haven't
Right.
gotten the hostages out.
Right.
How do you leave the government? But
Right.
others say if you don't leave the government, you will be more identified with Bibi in a way that will make it hard for you to separate yourself when the election does happen, maybe later this year.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of
There will be a
questions.
moment, but there will be a moment for Gantz and Eisenkot
Yeah,
to.
it definitely will be. And but what's happened is with Bibi, I think, is that he's convinced they're halfway out the door. And the net effect of that is that he's going to be stuck with the people who brought him to the dance, which was Smotrich and Ben Gvir. So his view is, yeah, maybe now I have a bigger coalition. I have there's a coalition of 75 out of 120, but or 76. But it's really 64 because Benny and Gotti are going to leave at a certain point, and then I'm going to be dependent on these guys again. And this,
Right.
by the way, drives the White House up the wall because their view is here. I cut a deal with Bibi on things like let flour into Gaza. And yet then Smotrich says, no, I think there might be customs duty on the flour. So they don't let the flour out of the port because he's the finance minister in charge of the customs authority.
Oh,
Or I cut a deal with Bibi on Kerem Shalom. I showed you that access point for
right.
trucks so we get more trucks in. And yet then Ben-Gvir tells people, let the police let these protesters through a closed zone and disrupt Kerem Shalom. So Kerem Shalom is shut down. Now, I think Kerem Shalom was actually open the last 2 days, but it had been shut down. So if you're in the White House, like, wait a second, we cut a deal. The president of the United States has got better things to do than to renegotiate every single truck in Kerem Shalom.
Yeah.
So there's some of these hardcore people that have complicated U.S.-Israel relations. I'm sorry to say.
Yeah, yeah, no, no, I hear you. So, let me ask you on let's switch maybe to the U.S. for a second.
Sure.
Not campuses, but rather elections. So, how do you see the situation in Israel being different in the next 12 months following U.S. elections, depending on who wins the presidency, Biden versus Trump, which of course is another hour and a half conversation. But I mean,
Look,
is
it's
there
another conversation. I
and there
try
are some
not,
questions.
though
Let
I
me just
served in one administration, I try not to take positions that get me all caught up in American domestic politics. I will say this, though. I
right.
never thought to say, yeah, Israelis and Arabs are much easier to deal with. This is above my pay grade sort of thing. I will say this. I think it's fair to say, and by the way, for those of you who, I don't know if I might lose you in the next few minutes, I hope if you go on Twitter, X, or Instagram, that you follow me at David Makovsky or David.Makovsky, because I try to post on what goes on every day, at least as an article I saw that I think people should see, or, a couple paragraphs on something. Last night, I focused on Ramadan and how that's changing people's calculations coming up on March 10th. But to your question about American domestic politics, look, it's huge, Danny, in terms of these next between now and Memorial Day. It's like, let's say Biden is convinced, I got this Saudi deal. I can taste it. This is going to turn the Middle East upside down in a good way. And thank you to Helena for saying that you'll email the Twitter info. I appreciate that. Or Helene, sorry. All I could say is that these 3 months are crucial because you need Republicans, if you do have a deal, to raise their finger for this breakthrough, which would be a Saudi-Israeli breakthrough. But what if former President Trump, excuse me, says to his people, like he did on the Mexican border last
Right.
week,
Right.
don't give Biden a victory during an election year.
Right.
So they had worked out this deal that even Republicans thought was a good deal, and yet the same people who worked on the deal then voted against it. I think the White House is very scared that we in the U.S. won't get to 67.
Right.
And so their view is the closer you get to the election, the more politics inserts itself. And therefore, if there's going to be a breakthrough, it's got to go fast. For it to go fast, the war's got to end. But the U.S. can't tell Israel when to end the war. That's up to Israel. So it's hoping to at least use the hostage release as the exit ramp. But it's all really tied into the domestic political scene. And the president does feel, again, people here on this call can agree, can disagree with the president, that he has incurred a lot of political risk. I think most people believe he's incurred risk with the progressive wing of his base.
Sure.
And what drives him crazy, apparently, from what we hear from people around him, it's not that I spoke to the president, but from people around him, is that I'm taking political risks with those progressives every single day, every day.
Right.
But Bibi doesn't take the risk with Smotrich and Ben-Gvir.
No.
And Bibi's answer, I'm sure, is yeah, because they can't bring you down. You can make it till November. I won't make it till tomorrow.
Right.
So he'll say it's not analogous, but but that's So the president, though, feels he's made these risks. He's very focused on the state of Michigan right now. He
Mhm.
had to send six of his administration last Thursday, I think it was, to Michigan, including the deputy national security advisor, John Feiner, who I know, to talk to them in Dearborn. You could say, is this more about Dearborn than Dehesha? You know, much more focused on American politics. But they wanted to know, why is the president so supportive of Israel and doesn't seem to have that same emotional energy for Palestinians. By the way, apparently they sent the campaign man,
Folks, hold on, just folks, just so you know, Daisha is a Palestinian
refugee camp
refugee
outside
camp
of Bethlehem. Sorry
on the
about that.
road between Bethlehem and Jerusalem.
I couldn't resist the illusion,
I like the illusion. I used to pass it every Friday when I
Yeah,
lived in
yeah.
Israel.
On the way to Gush, right?
Exactly.
100%. So, I think they sent their campaign manager, and the people of Dearborn like threw her out saying, we don't care about the political people. We want the policy people. So it's
So
one of
let
the
me,
5 or 6 battleground states, swing states. So that's where the president's very weak in the polls right now. Now you can't say maybe it has nothing to do with Dearborn. Maybe there's other factors, like with the unions aren't happy with him for other reasons.
no, there's
No,
definitely,
but the political people are telling the policy people, you guys are so into the policy that you're forgetting the politics. And the politics are cutting
this,
against us, especially with young people.
yeah, this takes us though into the next, and I think we'll sort of make our way toward conclusion here. But I know you didn't want to talk
Camp.
about campuses per se, but you've been to almost 200 schools. You probably see anywhere from 100 to 200 students, at any one of these places.
Right.
You were talking tens of thousands of students, and you speak sometimes alone on PBS and other news stations on major networks, and sometimes with adversarial talking
Right.
heads. Uh, can you somehow, in brief, synthesize for us what is the message that works that
Yeah.
is working well for our adversaries? And if we had certain wins
Yeah.
in Gaza, toppling Hamas, exposing more about Hamas, would we be able to shift that? And then the contra to that is, I guess I'd want to know uh, where do you feel you make your points and are most successful? And are we forceful enough?
Yeah.
I sometimes feel that we're polite and our adversaries are very happy to flout inflammatory facts
Yeah.
as if they're truth.
Yeah. Yeah.
Go
No,
ahead.
you're raising such critical questions. If any of you guys have a chance, if I can throw in one more plug, if you guys go to YouTube and plug in my name, and you'll see I spoke to 800 students at Harvard, at the Harvard Business School. I was on a panel with the new, 2 years from now, she's already dean. There's a religious Palestinian woman named Amani Jamal, and also Khalil Shakaki, who I know for many decades when he got his PhD from Columbia. He's leading Palestinian political analyst, Shai Feldman, who's at Brandeis. So
It's a great session, folks. I would watch it. And to be honest, it's an hour and a half, but no offense, David, you could skip the first 20 minutes because it's all introductions of people and their back.
yeah. And by the way, I should say the video is not great because like from the ceiling. So do it like if you're
It's
taking
a
a walk
it's
or
a
you're
fantastic.
driving from the suburbs somewhere from Westchester or somewhere. Um, you know, but it's more her and I going back, and we always were very respectful of each other. But I felt that it was a very spirited exchange, and I hope, for those of you who watch it, and you can give your feedback to Danny and get the stuff to me. But look, I think this, what you said before about what I call, do you either inflame or do you inform? I think the nature of social media is that it inflames. It's not there to be a think tank guy to do a PowerPoints and all the insights that way. It's out to anger you. That's what social media is good at. Sadly, for this generation, that's how these young people get news today, through a vehicle that unabashedly likes to inflame rather than inform. And it's very sad. So there's a structural disadvantage there, Danny, that That's what the opponents focus on. They want to inflame. They don't want to inform in a
But what
way.
about even on your panels? Do you feel that I saw the PBS NewsHour with the head of the former Jordanian something or
Foreign
other,
minister, yeah, I was on with him.
right? And I also felt he kind of had to get in his look. I'm biased, right?
I
But
know, no, I know. He got the last word, but that was like the nature. I've been working PBS for 30 years, and I still feel that for my brand, you're better off with light rather than heat.
okay,
Want to be passionate, but ultimately you want to make sure you can educate. And I think having empathy, people empathize with Israel if they feel you do actually care if the other side lives or dies. So I would, but your point is such a good one about where's the other structural disadvantage. I said this to a provost at, I won't say the name of the university, but 25,000 students. And I said this provost, it was like one-on-one with this guy. And I said to him, listen, here's a problem. I teach at Johns Hopkins now for what, 24 years, except the time I was in government, and to graduate students called the School of Advanced International Studies. Um, when we train students on conflict resolution, we want them to know what is the history of the conflict, what is the geography of the conflict, what is the demography of the conflict, what's the socioeconomics of the conflict, what is the governing structures on different sides of this conflict. But for people who focus on this whole issue of intersectionality, it's all about who is the oppressor and who is the oppressed.
right,
Now, what if the oppressed is an oppressor? There's so many permutations of this.
right,
I worry, Danny, that it's fundamentally an anti-intellectual exercise.
okay,
And the academy is supposed to be about, some sort of mind expanding, you know, thought. And if we are now compressing all that, history is irrelevant, geography is irrelevant, socioeconomics is irrelevant, demographics are irrelevant, government structures are irrelevant. If all this is irrelevant, we don't know what river and what sea. We don't, because it's irrelevant according to this theory. So what
right.
does the provost say to me?
Hmm.
And again, it's like I wish, a lot of the, your chat group with the Columbia alumni could have been in this room. Says to me, he said, David, it's horrible. He said, it's this
Ah,
this theory of intersectionality is a crisis in impacting social science across the United States, across the academy,
wow,
all across our country. It's so deep. Israel is like the low-hanging fruit of it. Oh, Israel's a manifestation of it, is a casualty of it. But Israel is not the be-all and end-all of it. It goes much worse. The problem is we're in the throes of a failed theory in social science that's affecting every university almost in the United States. By the way, he's a hard sciences guy. But he
hmm,
said, this is a failed theory.
hmm,
We're stuck in it. We don't know how to extricate ourselves from it. It's just horrible. It's a joke of a theory, a joke. And
wow,
yet, for the students, they're infected by this. And to hear it from a provost, but you see, part of the problem is that even if the university administrators understand this, you have a lot of faculty who are tenured. It's
right,
not like a new leadership of a corporation, a new CEO comes in, does some house cleaning. It doesn't work that way in universities.
right,
That means once you get tenure, you're there, and to make change is like turning around a cruise liner.
right.
It's very difficult. So I'm hearing to make your point on steroids. It's even it's even harder than a lot of the critics of the university world are admitting. It's even tougher because of these factors. Social media, the failed theory of social science of intersectionality, the fact that universities can't be turned around.
Right.
I don't know. I think this is really hard, and it's going to lead also in the American Jewish community to thoughts about where should kids go to school. I mean,
Well,
imagine, for example,
yeah, I'm
Danny,
going through that now with my son who's a
I
junior.
know I said to the head of Hillel, and I know I have a TV interview in like 3 minutes, but let me just finish on this thought. I said to the head of Hillel International, I said, what would be great is if you would get for all the guidance counselors, career guidance counselors, college guidance counselors, and just even in the day school world, maybe not for the Orthodox because they can only go to a few schools anyway, so it doesn't really affect them as much. But for the community day schools, I don't know if they're in Westchester, I don't know if they're in Chicago or Los Angeles, or certainly
Yeah,
we have one in Washington. But to somehow have some sort of sessions on what of these schools are
yeah.
more open in this regard,
Question.
I think would have a huge impact.
Before I agree with you. Before we leave, lightning questions
Uh,
here. One professional accomplishment that you're most proud of. What comes to mind?
I don't know. I don't know. I don't think of it that way. I mean, there have been a lot. I've been very fortunate. I blessed the Washington Institute, which is the greatest place a guy could ask to work for.
There you go. There it is. There you go.
I've got like 15 different things that I'm very proud of, but I can't really reduce it to one.
All right.
But I look
I'm
forward to
reading
talking
now.
again.
I am reading now Tom Segev's book called "One Palestine: Jews and Arabs Under the British Mandate." Honestly, in every chapter, it seems there's a paragraph that's
Yeah,
lifted from today's news
yeah,
headline.
yeah, yeah,
What books, other than yours, and you can
yeah,
include yours,
yeah,
give us a book you recommend.
yeah.
I recommend Segev's book. I think it's fantastic. But what would you recommend?
I would like the book I did with Dennis Ross was on Be Strong and of Good Courage, four leaders of Israel who made historic decisions. I hope that gives you a flavor of Israel. I think Danny Gordis's book on like
Hmm.
Israel Reborn is a good one volume. There are a bunch of these things, but I think those are two that
Catch
come.
67, Micha Goodman.
Micha Goodman's Catch 67 is good. Yeah. There's a few of them that are
All
good.
right. With so
I
much
wish I could
more to
stay on
cover,
longer, but
David,
I'm happy to come on with you again.
we're going to do this.
If there's one silver lining for October 7th is that you united a lot of people in our Columbia class that we had been out of touch with each other, and I hope we don't need, God forbid, a war to stay in touch about Columbia. So
Well, I
let's be
think we're
better
back
than.
together. So,
Thank you. Keep up the good work, Danny.
David, Toda Rabba Lecha.
All right, all the best to everyone. All the best.
Thank you all.